Hi everyone, got an interesting game to share with you. It's quite a long one and gets to a very interesting end game as well. So my opponent was rated just over 1500 and we have e4, we have the French of course, d5 and advanced variation and c5. So far so normal. c3, you see this a lot at the lower levels. I don't think it's that popular among masters, but then okay, knight to c6, so lining up pressure on this pawn, that's the idea, and it's currently got two defenders. Okay, and now a3, seems like he knows what he's doing. I think a3 does have some purposes with white trying to get this counterplay on the queen side. So I now play queen to b6, adding a third attacker onto this, and it's currently defended twice. So knight to f3 adds a third defender. Now I just bring my bishop up to d7, just heading off any ideas of silliness here. We have bishop to e2, and now when white plays the bishop to e2, I have it in my notes to say that you want to bring your knight out to here, where the knight is then attacker number 1, 2, 3, 4 on this pawn. Okay, so knight to e7, castles, and now knight to f5. So we have two knights and a queen ganging up on that pawn, and we have 1, 2, 3 defenders. So I mean, one option I guess is to bring this bishop out to here, but instead white chooses to trade the pawn for my c-pawn. So I recapture with the bishop now. That also prevents this rook move, which white would like to play, because then we'd have bishop takes f2 with a fork on the king and the rook, not very attractive. Okay, and now I also have the two central pawns compared to white's solo central pawn. So a slight win there. Now we have b4, bishop has to retreat, knight comes out, queen now retreats to look at this pawn. So we've got knight and queen looking at that pawn. Defenders, only one. All basic stuff. Now the knight comes round. Maybe white missed it, I don't know. And grabs and grabs. So we have a trade of knights. Now, of course, bishop comes here to b2. Might have ideas of moving the pawn forward with a discovery on the queen. I bring my bishop up to this square, d6. Now, if he's got ideas of that, it's going to be too late because I've got a checkmating threat. So I saw his threat and I met it with a greater threat. So g3 is now pretty much forced. Now I bring my bishop up here. So pinning the knight basically on the queen. So I thought that was a decent move. And now the rook comes across to e1 after all. So the queen bishop barrage against the f2 pawn is now gone because I've moved my pieces onto a different diagonal. So they were on there, they're now both on there. It's forced this move. Now, I saw something here, which was that the bishop could come to b5 with check and a discovery on the queen. Okay, so I spotted it, and the move that I played was castles. Now, that wasn't good enough. Just not good enough. Because, well, I'll show you white's next move, because he plays bishop to b5 anyway, and I just didn't think it through. Right, so there's a discovery on the queen. The bishop is also attacking my undefended bishop on a4, and this is why it makes so much sense to put your pieces on squares where they are defended, where you coordinate all your pieces on the board together. Anytime there's an undefended piece, you are just creating the possibility, it might be a slim possibility, might never happen, but possibility of something like this. It's a double attack, right? Very, very common. Discovered attack, and the piece that moves attacks something else. Okay, so my bishop is going to fall. Now here what I decide is, rather than simply move my queen and lose a three-pointer, lose my bishop, take the rook with check. Queen has to recapture, and then I actually have a choice of bishop or knight. Okay, so I capture the bishop, and now material is actually equal because I've got a rook and a minor piece, which are worth 5 and 3, in return for a queen, which is worth 9. But I was up a pawn already because I captured this guy here, didn't I? So, interesting situation now. I have 2 rooks, I have the bishop pair and a knight. White has 1 rook, 2 minor pieces and a queen. So material is technically, mathematically equal. The other advantage I have is I have central pawns. Now it gets really, really interesting. Knight comes in with a fork on knight and bishop, so we trade knights. And white's now given himself also an isolated pawn through that. I come across to the open file. White's rook comes across to the open file, and I decide to block with my bishop. So just nullify that move completely. We now have a 4. I drop my dark squared bishop back. We have b5, and I block off again with b6. Right, so very interesting times. Queen comes up now, and I push h6 with the idea of maybe bishop to here. But then that would just prompt f4 to come out. But again, that would at least open up some space around the king. Rook comes forward now, getting off of this long diagonal. So maybe white spotted that threat. I now bring out my dark squared bishop to here. So my bishops are actually covering a lot of good squares there. Bishop comes across, and this bishop is now pinned on the rook. So forces a trade of bishops, and the queen comes over there. I now move my rook to e8, just getting off the dark square, and the queen now comes in behind my lines. And this is where it gets kind of dangerous, because the queen could quite easily gobble up my pawns and help these guys through. Material is actually equal. So now I play bishop to d3. I'm thinking, I know material is kind of equal, but I'm feeling the threat, put it that way. I have this extra pawn, but white's got a queen for a bishop and a rook. So my idea is basically put the bishop on here, controlling these light squares, and somehow, let's say we trade off rooks or whatever. If white is off his guard, I've got rook to c1, that would be checkmate. Okay, so it's an idea, and we do trade rooks. And the queen comes here. But I don't have time to get my bishop onto there yet, right? If I play check now, king comes here, bishop comes here with check, just pushes f3. And I have to move my bishop away. And then I'm going to lose my pawns and stuff like that. Not nice. So, I now lift my rook up to c4. It's looking at 2 undefended pawns. Now I think what white should have done here is simply grab this pawn and then stop me from grabbing that one. But white plays queen e8 check, forces my king away, and then they grab the pawn. Okay, so now I've got these 3 pawn islands, 3 pairs. This a7 pawn is going to be very hard to defend, but do I have to capture that? But instead of that, I put my bishop on e4, again covering these light squares and fishing now for a checkmate, forces f3. And now I throw in a check, and the king moves. Now I throw in another check, and the king moves again. Now I throw in another check, okay? And now what's interesting here is that as soon as the king moves, my rook is looking at this pawn as well as my bishop, which is itself defended, okay? King moves. Now I have a choice, rook takes or bishop takes. The bishop is actually in a very strong position in the middle of the board here. It's on a defended square, so I decide to capture with the bishop. I thought I'd capture with the rook. And now, this I don't really get, okay? Well, capturing with the bishop comes with check, at least, right? And the king can't come here or here, can't go there or there, so what's he gonna do? Now, I think the king should simply have moved, because then the king is attacking my rook and the queen is attacking my bishop. I think rook takes was probably the better move, But here, for some reason, white decided to swap off the queen for the bishop and the rook. And king recaptures, and that leaves me with an extra pawn. Okay, I have 2 in the middle, white has 1. Other than that, everything else is blocked off. So now we're in the ending, and this gets really, really cool. So king to g6, king moves forward. Okay, and this is where the occupation of squares becomes so, so important. King f6, g4. So now we have opposition, so my king cannot advance. I now push g6. The engine said that g5 check was better. I guess it would have forced the king back, but then I'm thinking my king can't go to this square or this square because they're covered by the pawns. That's what I really want to do. I really want to get into the line. Okay, I don't want to be behind the pawn line. So now white plays h4, g5 check, takes, check. And now the king cannot advance and he can't go here. So now it's white's king that's going to be forced to retreat. Okay. Now we've got 2 deadlock pawns here, we've got deadlock pawns here. This is my advantage. This guy, Eddie the e-pawn, is my material advantage. So I need to press home that advantage. So what can I do? Now, fortunately, I noticed that white's king can't go there or there or there or there. Or here or here. So white's king cannot actually get behind the line. So I have an advantage, which is that I have a pawn break, potentially. I have e5. I could play that now. And if pawn takes, king takes, and we should be good. Instead, I decide to come around the back for some reason to here. And the king moves again. And now I play the move, which was absolutely identical. I don't know why I wasted 2 moves on that. Okay, and now we're in a situation. I have to move. I can't move that pawn because that takes and then promotes. If I push this pawn, yeah, the king can't go there, may have to retreat. That might have been a good move. I decide to play king f4. King comes after my pawn. I grab his pawn, and now we're in a foot race. So queen promotes to g1. Importantly, with check, right? And this is a very interesting ending. There were a couple of points in the next few moves when I thought, is this a draw? This is nothing I've ever studied. 2 pawns on the side and against 1 queen. I just don't know. Is this meant to be a win for the side with the queen? Is it meant to be a win for the side with the pawns? Who knows? Anyway, so I have to figure it out from first principles. So I come into d4. An alternative move was g6, but this one also is perfectly good. Now, pawn pushes. So the king has now kind of boxed himself into this area. I come across to c4 with the queen, which was the best move, because basically now it pins this pawn on the king. So b6 is now not playable, and a5 is also stuck, it can't advance, so the king's going to have to move. So the king comes to here. I throw in a check, king comes back, and I'm starting to think, I don't know, how do I win this? Queen comes back, pins the pawn again, king moves back. Now I don't want to draw by repetition, but it crossed my mind, thinking if this is a drawn game, maybe I should just take the draw and 1 rating point. But I come back round with queen to e6 check, king comes down, check again, king comes there, check again, king comes there, check on b8 now. Okay, king goes in the corner. And I'm thinking, okay, we are in danger of repetition. So now I decide to bring my king in. I realise I can't checkmate a king with only a queen. It's impossible, right? Because the king's always going to have somewhere to move, and the queen can't go adjacent to the king because she'll get captured. So now b6 gets pushed, and I advance my king again. So I'm not too worried about this one particular pawn, but I am worried actually about stalemating white as well, because I kind of want to put my king here or here, and then check. But that would be stalemate because the king can't go there, or here because of my king. So his king now moves. I throw in a check. He comes back, I throw in another check on a8, and now king to d6. And I figured out that if white now pushes a6, I think I'm all right. He pushes a6, and now queen to d5. Now, if I put my queen here, white could have moved across to there, but with the queen here, all these squares are now out of bounds to the king. So the king must separate itself from the pawns and retreat. So the king now comes back to a4. Apparently b4 was superior, but either way, I was going to play... I mean, if the king had gone back here, I'd have just played queen to here. And I would have forced the king away anyway. So I played queen to here. Okay, king comes down. Now queen c5. King can only go back, and now I grab the pawn, and clearly this pawn is going to fall, and my opponent here resigns. So very, very interesting endgame there. I really felt like I'd kind of exposed my lack of knowledge in the ending, but going over this a couple of times and going over it with the engine as well, apparently it was winning all the time for black. I just need to remember what I have to do in that situation. And I think the key thing was, as soon as these pawns came side by side, and with the king on the wrong side of the pawns, that's when I was okay. So very straightforward from that point on, but definitely gave me a few moments in that game. Another learning point, of course, was losing the bishop to the discovered double attack. I saw the check threat, which would have won the queen, but I missed that bishop could have moved with another alternative attack on my undefended bishop. So one to remember, every day is a learning day, and also never give up. You might be playing a higher rated opponent, as I was here, but you know, people mess up. Him swapping his queen for the bishop and the rook was clearly a blunder. He was actually in a winning position at that point, and the graph just dropped right down in black's favour. But you know what? Players will make those mistakes. It happens all the time. There's millions of games being played every day on chess.com. Millions of blunders, I'm sure. So yeah, don't give up. It's worth sticking in there. If you've got a shout in a game, stick in there. And really just, I mean, I'll say this again and again and again, but the attitude that you need to take, not just at every game, but every single move, right? So if you saw my video from earlier on, I was in a winning position, up basically like a queen for a rook in a game earlier on. I just pushed a pawn and allowed a knight to fork my king and queen from a totally winning position. Happens all the time. So every move counts. Okay, if you can adopt the practice of applying the same kind of clinical evil mentality to every move that you play in a game, and just give up entirely playing these rush moves, and always do the sanity check, right? Before you make a move, is there anything stupid about this? Have I stalemated my opponent? Am I going to get forked? All of these things, right? That discipline alone, I think, is worth 100 points in your rating, quite honestly. I feel like I should be a 1600 at this point, because that's the level that I'm capable of playing at. So when I lose to somebody rated 1200, 1300, whatever, I chastise myself and say, like, I should not be losing to people of that rating. And it's nearly always a case of discipline. It's nearly always a case of just not taking enough time over my moves, getting cocky, getting too happy when I'm in front, starting to congratulate myself and starting to celebrate too early. Don't do that shit. If you do that, then, like me, you deserve to lose games. Okay? Just stop it. Adopt that hard-nosed, clinical, intellectual discipline, not just into every game, for every single move, and I promise you, you will do better. Your rating will climb, you'll win more games, and you'll find a lot of satisfaction in that success. So there you go. Hope you've enjoyed this game. I certainly enjoyed playing it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.